So we now understand that DNA, RNA, these nucleic acids are made up of nucleotides, and these nucleotides come together to form polynucleotides. And what I mean by that is, for example, this nucleotide right here is somehow bonded to this other adjacent nucleotide on these double DNA strands. And how this happens is through a mechanism, and we're going to talk about that mechanism in a second, but this bonding right here is made possible through something called a phosphodiester bond. We're going to talk about that in a second. So let's say we have two nucleotides theoretically. The first nucleotide is an ATP, an adenosine triphosphate, and the second is a thymidine triphosphate. And notice we have deoxy right here. DNA basically does have a deoxy sugar, so it's pretty obvious. We don't have to say deoxyadenosine triphosphate, but that's fine as well. So the question is, if we have these two nucleotides on a strand and they're adjacent to one another, how are they bonded to one another? And that happens, like we said, through a phosphodiester bond. And the theoretical or the dictionary definition of that is nucleotides will bond through the phosphodiester bond. The 3' sugar, which has a hydroxide, and it is going to add itself on the 5' phosphate, which is right over here. So it's reference to this carbon here and this other carbon, the 3' and the 5' carbon. So the mechanism behind this is going to be discussed right here. So the adenosine triphosphate is on the top. It has a hydroxide on the 3'. And what really happens is this lone pair of electron is nucleophilically going to attack the phosphate. And when this happens, the extra lone pairs is now going to cause, let's say this nucleophilic attack has happened. And what's going to happen next is we're going to have the phosphate donate its electrons to this bond over here. And what really happens at the end is very interesting. It's just a normal nucleophilic attack. And this is what happens at the end. So we have a leaving group, which is, hopefully you know this formula's name or this compound's name now. It's a pyrophosphate. The leaving group is going to be a pyrophosphate. It's going to have a negative charge on it, and that's going to. And notice what's going to happen next. So it has a negative charge. Now we have an empty spot to fill over here, and this is very interesting because look what's happening. This is what happens. This oxygen right here is happily going to bond. Doesn't have a double pair anymore. Is happily going to bond with this phosphate over here. So whoops, looks what's happening. We have a bond with the phosphate, and this oxygen is still bonded to the hydrogen. Well, not the hydrogen, excuse me, the other carbon. So still bonded to that other to the carbon on the sugar molecule. And this hydrogen right here is happily going to go bond with this pyrophosphate. So to kind of make this look more better in a sense, it's going to make more sense now, hopefully. This is how it looks like in a neater version. So we have the pyrophosphate, which is bonded to the oxygen. The oxygen is bonded to the 3' of the other adenosine triphosphate. And we have a leaving group, which is a pyrophosphate, which is bonded to the hydrogen which is right over here. So this is the basic structure of how DNA and nucleic acids are kind of coming together to form polynucleotides. And something to mention real fast is the base right here is the only differential part in these polynucleotides. So if we see a DNA strand, a single strand from DNA, we can notice that the phosphate and the sugar is invariable. It's not changing at all. So really the only variable part is the aromatic nitrogen bases, and these bases will determine the characteristics of the nucleotide. So here's a question to ask. What is a pyrophosphate made up of? So this question is really just referring to the individual parts of a pyrophosphate. And the answer to that question is an orthophosphate. Two orthophosphates will come together to form a pyrophosphate. And if you haven't seen the previous videos, which I highly encourage you to watch, if you haven't seen them, this is just really highlighting that a phosphate oxygen phosphate bond is a very high energy bond, and it's very favorable in our metabolism because this bond is very exothermic.